Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. And they were all amazed and said amongst themselves, what a word this is. For with authority and power he commanded the unclean spirits, and they come out. So the fame of him went into every place throughout the country round about. And he arose from the synagogue and entered into Simon's house. So Simon's wife's mother was taken with a great fever, and they besought him for her. And he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it immediately went out. And she arose and ministered unto them. Now when the sun was setting, all they that had any sick with diverse diseases brought them unto him, and he laid his hands on all them and healed them. So a conclusion of Jesus' first, recorded casting out of devils in the fourth chapter of the book of Luke. We just saw his journey of, John being called, John baptizing the people, him being baptized, his, testing in the wilderness, and his return to his home city where they refused to accept him. So now here he is in Capernaum, still in Galilee. So from Nazareth to Capernaum. So we see a conclusion here of the man in the synagogue with the spirit of the unclean devil. We ended last video yesterday where he rebuked him and he came out. So now here we're left with the aftermath, people's observation. So, and this is what's really gonna get them talking. I know this, really introduces a principle that, sometimes, many things can be said about this. Because, one would hope that they would just be able to receive his words and that would be enough. But, being human beings that we are, you have to study what it is that you're about. And in this preaching business, we're about people. So, you have to understand how they work. You can't idealize all day. You can beat your head against the wall. You can, go through all the mental struggles and frustrations. But, to understand people, we just saw him come from Nazareth where he just, rebuked them in the synagogue and they came out. They wanted to throw him head down off the hill. So now, his miracles, is being emphasized. And that's going to open up the doors for them to receive him. Like I said, he went the straight preaching route the other time and, they hated him for it. So now, after, witnessing this casting out of devil, we see the people are, amazed. Now, we know that he was not sent here to amaze, anybody, to entertain, to convince anybody of anything, but he was sent here to show us the truth. And it's up to us, and that's why God is a master of giving us free will. Now, I would say that each person's situation is different, and, just the probability of how things turn out. Some will fall into a more favorable, easier conversion. Others it will be harder, more difficult. Each situation is different. Each moment of the day is different. Things aligning at different times differently. So, a great lesson is to be learned here about the nature of people. He tried to come at them, the first way, just, with truth. And, he came from a very, paternalistic, stance. And like I said, we're, imperfect humans living in an imperfect world. But, he himself said that, he that winneth souls must be wise, right? So now, something can be learned here for us about, the game plan and the execution of, our intended goals. How if one thing is not working, there's no shame in pulling it back and trying something else. There's no shame in having an arsenal of, variable, varied, options to choose from. The skilled worker is able to have, a million tools and know when to use each one. So here, the aftermath, them being amazed. The first time this doctrine is being given unto us, the casting out of devils. First of all, the identifying of devils, first of all, and casting them out. You mean to tell me that we've been living with these things amongst us since the beginning of time, since Adam and Eve, and we're now being, shown them. We're now being, revealed to them face to face, and they're now being dealt with. So we see the awe factor being amazed at his authority to command these spirits. We would see later where others would try to cast them out, and it wouldn't work out so well. They would even jump on these people and beat them out their clothes, literally. So it's in this moment that we see his momentum really starting to build, because the excitement in their voice, they're going to go and tell others. And this is just the beginning of his working. And with each thing that he would do, that would be magnified. People would speak about it. And the great advantage they had in that day was that there was no distraction of the social media and the internet. Even though you could argue that, well, it could spread even faster, because now it would be able to get further distances with just by the click of a button. But I think that we more get distracted by these things, because now instead of having 100 different things to look, to scroll on, the happenings of the time not being that excited, this was able to take complete precedence. Because if you notice, anything that happens in the media, it comes and it maybe lasts a couple of weeks, and then it's on to the next. But with this going on, it was all that was talked about, and this would set him up to be sought after, for his next location to be anticipated. Imagine You going out trying to recruit people to speak unto them, versus them come seeking you, and them come seeking you with such great expectations. We see also him, also healing Simon Peter's mother-in-law fever. Now, a fever, it can come from so many different, things. Many different things can be wrong, and a fever is really a non-specific, just generalized, observation, a symptom, and being, many things can cause it. It would be like, having a game console like a Xbox or a PlayStation, PS5 or whatever. Know that you're able to put any game in there. You can put any, from whatever millions of games that they have, play any game. That's non-specific in that it can play any game. It's not limited to one. So this fever, it can be caused by, many different things. So this shows us that, his word, his authority, his healing, that he's either able to identify the source and directly speak to that, even though he doesn't say it out loud, or his word is just so, authoritative that, everything has to line up. Should mean it could be very specific or just non-specific. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He said, let there be light. I always like to say that so many things went into all these calculations, but we did not see God sitting down, calculating, lines of incidents, the refractive line, how when it hits a certain, surface, how the rays would scatter. He just said, let there be, and there was. All these things, they all lined up to his word. And in healing, and, not just healing, deliverance, fixing a situation, whether it be something sentimental, something, concerning your occupation or career, your family members, your children, something that's going on in your body, a certain social situation that you have, wherever you might, find yourself, how he's able to handle the specifics of things. He doesn't throw him off course. Because, with other things, we know what's going on. And even then, some of them we still don't know. Because with leprosy, we know that there's the microorganism that causes that. With blindness, so many things can be wrong. The retina could be messed up. The part where the retina, the optic nerve, meets the brain. It could be the cells in there. It could be, opacity, complete opacity or absence. Any other structures. So many things could go wrong with blindness. But we don't ever hear him say, I command the optic nerve to be restored. No, he just said, receive thy sight, right? When God tells us not to worry, he's got everything under control. You could use something like this to give, visual evidence to how he understands the specifics. Even beyond layers that we may never discover, not with all our technology and science and research. And at the end of these, these scriptures that I just said, the last one, we saw where now the people were gathering unto him. So the word had gone out somehow that he is able to heal all these things. So now, them bringing all these people unto him, and him laying his hands on all of them and healing them. No doubt, everyone there had a different ailment, and there were many, different things. One can argue and say that Jesus is the kind of healer that he doesn't need triage. In the ER, when you go, they see you by the level of urgency. Something that's life-threatening, you get seen first, even though people were waiting there 2, 3, 4 hours before you. We don't see him having to separate people like, these guys, they have, respiratory conditions. These ones, they have diabetes, blood disorders or infections. We don't see him saying that, well, these ones, how he's able to just, see all of them, be able to handle all of them, right there and right then, not needing to consult anybody, not needing to consult his handbook or manual for infectious diseases, not having to call for help from his, supervising physician. All right, so how do we end up here? The 4th chapter of the book of Luke, where it said, and Jesus returned full of the Holy Ghost from Jordan, and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, and was there 40 days tempted of the devil. And in those days he did eat nothing, and when they were ended, he was afterwards and hungered. Then the devil appeared unto him, saying, if thou be the Son of God, command that this stone be made bread. But Jesus answered and said unto him, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. The devil taking him up to an exceeding high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said, all this power will I give unto thee, and the glory thereof. For unto me are all these things delivered, and to whomsoever I will I may give it. If thou shalt therefore worship me, all shall be thine. But Jesus answered and said unto him, get thee behind me, Satan, it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God only, him only shalt thou serve. Said the devil, taking him up Jerusalem, and set him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from thence, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge over thee, and they shall bear thee up in their hands, lest any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. But Jesus answered and said unto him, it is written, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And when the devil had ended all the temptations, he departed from him for a season. So Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit into Galilee, and there went out a fame of him to the region round about, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. So then he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he entered into the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of Isaiah the prophet. And when he had opened it, he found a place where it was written, Behold, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, the recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty them that are bruised, preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And when he had closed the book, he gave it again to the minister and sat down. And the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say unto them, This day is the scripture fulfilled in your ears. And all that heard him bare him witness, and wondered at the gracious words which did proceed out of his mouth. And they said, Is this not the son of Joseph? But Jesus answered and said unto them, You shall surely say unto me this proverb, Physician, heal thyself. All that we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in thy home country. But verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in their own home country. And I tell you of a truth, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elias, when the heavens were shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout the whole land. And unto none of them was Elias sent, save unto Sarepta, a city of Sidon, unto a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the days of Eliseus the prophet, but none of them were cleansed save Naaman the Syrian. And when all they in the synagogue heard him speak thus, they were filled with wrath, and they rose up and thrust him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill whereon the city was built, that they might cast him down headlong. But he passing through the midst of them went his way. So then he came into Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and taught them on the Sabbath days. And all them that heard him were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. There was in the synagogue a man with the spirit of an unclean devil, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him and said, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And the spirit threw him in the mist, and came out of him, and hurt him not. Then we pick up right here, and if you notice from the reading, so he came into Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and he's teaching on the Sabbath. So now there happened, to be there a man with an unclean spirit, of a devil. And when this man saw him, the devil, he screamed out, Let us alone. What have we to do with thou? Then we see Jesus rebuking him, and he came out of him. So now we pick up here, where it says, They were all amazed and said one to another, What a word this is! For with power and authority he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out. So, marveling, seeing fireworks. One can't even liken it to, how you go to play a sport or something fun, and they sit you down first and instruct you on everything. At first he was instructing, on all these things, but now they get to play the game. Whether it be laser tag or paintball or whatever else, they were upset listening to the instructions. They were upset having to hear him sit and read all these theories onto them. I guarantee you, when you go to school for something, whether it be to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, to be a craftsman, a plumber, up into, when you're in the class and they're showing you everything in the textbook, and you have to study, you have to read, you have to understand, you have to take quizzes, you have to memorize, depending on if you like, reading and learning, you might like that. But, when you get to go in the hospital or you get to argue in the courtroom, now that's fun, right? So now here they are, seeing the fun part, the thing that's going to amaze and dazzle. If little kids, they're always asking if we can go outside and play. So this is, that kind of experience for them. So when they heard it, they were amazed and said amongst themselves. So now they're talking. This is something that they can get on board with. Because seeing the rubber meet the road, seeing, all things be applied. So they're saying, what a word is this? You remember, since the days of Moses, they were being taught by these chief priests, elders, and scribes. During the days of, Moses and Joshua, we heard of there being a high priest. We didn't really hear these terms. There were elders, no doubt. Scribes, is a newer term. Pharisees, Sadducees. So they're saying, what a word is this? Because, the things that they were being taught and told was nothing like this. The scribes and Pharisees, they were doing their best. They are not the Son of God. They have not been receiving, instructions from God, as we can tell. But then, can one not argue and say, well, if they had taken it, serious, if they had right heart, and mindset, if they came from the right, position, of humility, wanting to do, God's will, wanting to do what God wanted, and not what their teachers were teaching them, not was being handed down by tradition, not was popularly taught or popularly believed or accepted, not the stereotype that was being preached, not the stereotype expectations, not the stereotype, revelations, not the stereotype, doctrine, stereotype imaginations, the stereotype of what they thought was truth, when it was not, when it, was different from what they believed. If they were to have, really, sought for God, they were devouring widows' houses, defrauding these widows. One of the greatest, things that Jesus had against them. Praying these long drawn out prayers to be seen of men, disfiguring their faces so that people would feel sorry for them, that they were fasting. So God, he left them alone. He let them run around preaching their foolishness, teaching their foolishness, being about foolishness. He let them alone. So now when Jesus comes on this scene and he's speaking, no doubt this is different. This is new. And this is raw and with power. This is what they could have been if they had, come right at God. It would have been such a smooth transition when Jesus got here, because everything would have been lined up. John the Baptist what was said about him: prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his path straight. Why? Because these scribes and Pharisees were not making the path straight. They were making it very crooked. The crooked shall be made straight, the rough ways smoothened. They were messing everything up. You ever seen like something happen and somebody is like shocked? I want to say culture shock, but it's not about culture. Like, they'll be used to a certain thing, and then when they go somewhere else and they see something different, they're so amazed by it. But then the people there, they see that all the time, and they're like looking at this person like, you're not used to this. That's like the difference with what's going on right here. Say for example, a person that's been in abusive relationships and, real, selfish people that they've been around, and they get around a person that's good to them and that treats them well. How amazed they are and how unbelievable it is. They might even think it's too good to be true. They, oftentimes they said that they will sabotage that relationship because they're just not used to it, and they're so used to being taken advantage of. They're so used to being, beaten down, that they know that it's coming. So they say it's kind of like they're saying, instead of waiting for it to come and surprise me, how about I just bring it here myself and destroy it so that we can get to what, I really expect it to be, which is the same brokenness, abuse, and, mistreatment. Because these, I know that, casting out of devils was not given yet, but the revelations they could have received, the heart they could have received, the doctrine, they could have received, right? But they were so far away. What did God say? You cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. And they were old wineskins because of their ways, their beliefs, the thing that they were doing. And nobody could say nothing to them about it. So when they, saw this, they were amazed and said one to another, what a word is this? What a word is this? Having been separated so far from it, there are certain devices that they have to be calibrated. Because if they're not, then they go off course and they, produce a different effect. Let's say, for example, you had a assembly line that made bottles. So as long as it's kept calibrated, the bottles, they will come out the correct shape and volume, right? But then the mechanism, because it's heated, right? If it's not monitored, and they can start to become wobbly, over time. They can start having holes in there, imperfections. They were not being calibrated by God. So they were going on, producing all kind of things that they were not supposed to and had no business producing and being. God is the one that calibrates this thing, because it's his will, it's his word. There's God and there's a devil. And if you're not being calibrated by God, guess who's calibrating you? Sometimes we think that this devil, he sits by on the sideline and he just observes. No, you're not being calibrated by God. Guess what? This devil, he's gonna grab a hold of you and calibrate you. Now you're preaching things, doing things that you're not supposed to. The more you do it, the more you invite him in, and he takes completely over. Jesus called them, twofold more children of hell. So they said, what a word is this? And that's a shame, because they should have been getting this word. People that inspect certain things, you have, ASPCA, how they'll go and inspect, places and animals, and, they'll seize the animals because they're like, what's going on here? When they come to inspect, the standard has been dropped so much. Restaurants, they're regularly inspected because, that's food and we take that into our body. It's not like clothing or something external. So now them seeing this standard is like, wow. You mean to tell us we've been eating from dirty plates, dirty utensils, dirty pots, dirty tables. Look at how, unhygienic this food has been. Where's the health inspector? The health inspector needs to come and shut this place down. You mean to tell me that, our dumplings didn't need to have dirt and mud in there? That's why they're wandering so much. What a word is this? For with power and authority he commands the unclean spirits and they obey him. Now, just like I said yesterday, power and authority, he was there in the beginning. The beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. He created all these things. He created, his creation of these angels are not recorded, specifically, when creation is documented. 'Cause in the beginning, he created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of the Lord moved upon the face of the waters and said, let there be light. Everything he created, he did not mention the angels. But the Bible does say, who maketh his angel spirits and his ministers a flame of fire. He made them. He knows where the off switch is. He knows where the recall button is. And remember, God, like I said earlier in this video, is a master of free will, which means he gives free will, and that's his trademark, because he wants us to choose right. But understand that free will is just octacy, and he can pull that back anytime he wants. The judgment that will come. If you had free will, you could walk out of that punishment, right? Could walk out of hell. So with authority, he created all things, and everything has to bow to his word. And he can also remove free will. He can remove it and say, no, you do whatever I say right now. I'm turning this switch off, and whatsoever I say, that's it. So I'm telling you to come out this person, come out of them. So the next one says, and they went out of fame of him in every place in the country round about. So no doubt, first time this has ever been recorded in the Bible, in the gospel. And this is the first deliverance of devils in Luke. So now something like this being seen, first of all, is not only the identifying of the problem, but also the solution. A lot of times, as human beings, when we identify problems, sometimes it takes a while to find a solution. But here we have such a great, device, these, devils, that they're able to do so many things. They're able to possess people. They can lead you astray. They can persist, daily and get you to fall. They can get inside things and destroy them. They corrupt things. They corrupt people. They corrupt minds, places. Is there plague and pestilence? When we saw smallpox, it took a while to find, something to deal with that. The plague, the bubonic plague. But at least with these, we can see them, and we can see flesh rotting, and we can see that something needs to be, done. So we need to address this somehow. So no, these pestilence has been here for so long. We didn't even know they were here. And look at all the things that they've been doing. So no doubt this is going to spread so fast. So in the country roundabout, so we're still in Galilee. Remember, he just got kicked out of Nazareth. My question is this. I wonder how those in Nazareth felt when they heard. Because he was just here, We're still inside Galilee. And right now it's saying that the fame of him went into every place in the country roundabout. The Galilee, that's the country, We're in Capernaum right now, not a city of Galilee. Nazareth also being a city of Galilee, who just kicked him out. They led him to the hill, wanted to throw him down head first. How are they responding when they're hearing this? Because, I wonder if they had the insight to know that, well, if they had devils there, what are the odds we can have devils here? And we did not take advantage of what we had. When they were crucifying him and said, give us Barabbas, the question I would ask them, okay, and when you kill this man, who's going to cast the devils out of your kids? We just saw Jairus, his daughter, lay at home sick to the point of death. When they got there, she was dead. She already passed. Who's going to come wake your daughter up next time? You. He just healed your cousin with blindness. Who's going to, heal the next blind person? You. Your friend couldn't speak and he opened his mouth. Now he can speak. Who's going to open the next person's mouth? The fame of him went throughout all the regions round about. Because this is going to spread, the bar was low. Right? They didn't have, stories from all over the world at the tip of their fingers from the internet to compare this to. This itself was so great. There was nothing else competing for their attention. But how did those in Nazareth feel, knowing that he was just there? So the next one says, and he arose from the synagogue and entered into Simon's house. And Simon's wife's mother was taken with a great fever, and they besought him for her. So now, after all of that, it doesn't record any of his teachings, the words. We just saw him, say, how many lepers were in Israel in the days of Eliseus, how many widows were in the days of Elias. We don't see any of the words he spake here in Capernaum, just this healing of this unclean spirit. So he, departed and he went to Simon's house. So now we don't see here how they are recruited. I think in Matthew is where it shows, because after he turned the water into wine, he went walking by the seashore. He saw Simon Peter and Andrew, his brother. Then he saw James and John, the sons of Zebedee, with their father in the ship. We haven't seen, this is the first time we're seeing them mentioned here. And he went to Simon's house. We did not see Simon get recruited here in Luke. So he entered into his house. No doubt, after church, a lot of people, they like to go over each other's house for lunch. Remember, he's from Nazareth and they're in Capernaum. So when he entered the house, it said that she lay sick of a fever and they besought him for her. So, this besought of him for her is, he was there physically so they could say, look, here she is. But is this not intercession, when you pray for others, when you beseech, God for somebody else's behalf? He's not there in the physical like Jesus is now, but, they come unto him, making it known that, something's wrong with her and we need your help. We're asking for you to heal her. This is what we do in prayer when we pray for others. It's the same thing. Only he's not there physically for us to see him, in the flesh. So she lay, with this fever, Like I said, non-specific. I use the example of PS5 or Xbox or even a computer. I mean, your DVD player, even though we don't have those no more, you can put any DVD in there. Non-specific in that, there's many things that can cause this fever. It can be something bloodborne. It can be an infection. It can be like a cancer. Be something with an organ. Some inflammatory chronic, thing going on. I mean, so many things can cause a fever. We know that God is, God. He created all, but we don't pay conscious, mind to His intelligence. I say that God is an intelligent, guy. Some people, if you've ever been lucky to cross one of their paths, like in school or wherever else, the workplace, it seems as if anything you ask them, they can tell you, and they can break it down into such fine detail, and they can show you every piece of it. They're experts at these things, and God is an expert at this. I remember the angels, they record everything reserved for the day of judgment, so they're always observing you. You have guardian angels, add that to the mix. So the next one says, and he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her, and immediately she arose and ministered unto them. So he's him standing over her, so she's probably bedridden. So one thing we can't tell you is the specifics of how he heals, because him standing over her, his presence, these things, they have to flee. His word, they have to flee. What is going through his mind while he's doing this? Is he praying? Is he diagnosing? Is he like running a CAT scan or an MRI and looking at all the things? Is he running some, blood tests, CBC, WBCs, platelets, whatever markers? What's going on? What's he doing when he's standing over her and looking at these things? If we could tell you exactly what he's doing, that would be so great. Is he speaking to these things and they're speaking back to him? Does he have the authority to do that? I think he does. Imagine a red blood cell speaking. So he stood over her and he rebuked it. What is this rebuke? You're doing something you're not supposed to. I need you to stop, essentially. This thing that you got going on here, it ends right now. So she arose and ministered unto them. First of all, this shows that she didn't need no recovery time. If in a modern day she had went to the ER, whatever they did, it would have taken a couple days to work. Should have been in the bed for a week or whatever, month, depending on what, she needed done. She would have need time to recover. But with Jesus healing, there's no recovery time. Even when he healed, I just said Jairus' daughter, he took her by the hand and lifted her up, said, Talitha Kumai, which is interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. The Bible says she arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years, and he commanded them to give her something to eat. His healing is right then and there. Zero recovery time. And this shows that, when God does something for you, it would be so great if you would minister, unto him, unto his people. Some people, they just want to be healed and they go right back to what they're doing. But sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes you're healing, you got to stay close. You got to stay close to the source straight away. Whatever devil caused it, he comes right back. What does the Bible say? The unclean spirit is gone out of a man. It goes to dry places, seeking rest, finding none. Then it says, I will return to my home from whence I am come. Then it comes, finds it garnished and swept. He comes and finds all the healing, all the deliverance, everything in place. And he's saying, I didn't leave it like this. When I came out, I didn't see the fixing of all these things. So when he comes back now, he goes and gets 7 more spirits more wicked than himself. And he fixes it back how he likes it. So sometimes your healing is, stay close to the source. And while you're staying close, minister, help out. Because she, ministered unto them. In the mother, and they just came from the synagogue, she made them food to eat. No doubt. I'm Straw Greenhorn.